Good afternoon. Happy Friday. I'm Mary Alice Parks. This is The Briefing Room. I'm joined by my colleague, our political director, Rick Klein. And to help us break down one of the biggest headlines in Washington today, our senior White House producer, Justin Fischel.
It's a lot of pressure.
There you go. You better bring it.
Okay.
Okay, so guys, this morning, just 2 days after President Trump held a re-election campaign rally in Florida, his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, told the New York Times he was going to help the president win a second term, too. But he admitted he's going to use rather shocking tactics. Specifically, he told the Times that he was going to fly to Ukraine in the coming days and ask the Ukrainian government to help him find information that he thinks might be damaging to Vice President Joe Biden. So, Rick, big picture, the president and his team have spent the last 2 years saying they did not conspire with a foreign government ahead of 2016. But now we have Rudy Giuliani saying he wants to work with a foreign power to dig up dirt ahead of 2020.
Yeah, and this is a complicated story that involves the vice president and his son and business relationships, gas companies in Ukraine. But check out this quote, Mary Alice, because this says a lot. And this is an actual real-life quote from Rudy Giuliani speaking in his capacity as the president's own lawyer. Quote, "We're not meddling in an election, we're meddling in an investigation, which we have the right to do." So again, the attorney representing the president of the United States is heading overseas explicitly to say that he is meddling, quote, meddling in an investigation that he knows and is the first to admit has major political consequences against the leading Democratic candidate to run against President Trump.
And it's all over the place. He's not going there just to essentially dig up dirt on Biden. He wants to find out if the Clinton campaign worked with Ukraine in the lead up to the 2016 election. To disparage Paul Manafort, who was eventually tied up in the Mueller investigation. So try to let that sink in. He's going to Ukraine to figure out if politicians went to Ukraine in the past to do work with them, and he's going to go there now to do work with them to see if he can help Trump in the 2020 election. Basically, doing exactly what he's investigating and claiming was done improperly.
And was improper. Like he said, not illegal, but maybe improper. You know, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Democrat Adam Schiff, just blasted Rudy Giuliani and the entire Trump campaign over this. Let's listen to what Adam Schiff had to say on the House steps today.
It's stunning that the Trump administration is going down the same tragic path they did in 2016. Here you have the president's lawyer seeking help from a foreign government, again, to influence an American presidential election. It's just appalling. And his defense that he's not seeking a foreign government's help in the election, just an investigation. Yes, it's an investigation designed to affect one of the candidates they fear the most, Joe Biden. It seems to me that what Giuliani is saying and what others, Brad Parscale and others in the Trump campaign are saying is we're going to do everything short of what's downright criminal. Ethics don't matter anymore. Patriotism doesn't matter anymore. And if that's where we are as a country, then we're in deep trouble.
Now, Justin, Rudy Giuliani hedged in that New York Times article about whether or not the president was aware of this and sort of signed off on him going to do this work. What do we know about what the president knows?
It's not clear what the president knows, whether he supports or not. I think what Giuliani knows is that he knew that outrage was coming. He knew that everybody was going to talk about this trip because it's so weird, and it seems to fly in the face of everything we were investigating. But what it does, and maybe this perhaps is his motivation, is it draws attention to his purpose, which is to go dig up this story on Joe Biden and push this narrative that Biden and his son were involved in some corrupt dealings in Ukraine. And maybe it's a little self-sacrificial. Maybe he takes a few hits for it, but he gets this narrative out there. It's in the New York Times, you know. We're talking about it. And that, I would suspect, whether it's intentional or not, it's happening. That's part of the strategy here.
What do we know about those rumors? Is there any validity there?
Well, here are the facts as we know them. First of all, the vice president's son, the former vice president's son, Hunter Biden, did work for a Ukrainian energy company for a couple of years. They were trying to develop new energy initiatives, develop energy independence from Russia. This was a little weird because he had no apparent background in energy or in Ukraine. Around the same time, his father, the vice president, was running point for the Obama administration on Ukraine Ukraine policy, which was a fast-moving target, as we learned quite a bit during the 2016 election. And as part of that, as part of the official actions he took during that time, he has boasted about an effort that he took to at one point threaten to withhold aid package, $1 billion in aid, until a particular Ukrainian prosecutor was fired. That person was fired.
Who they saw as corrupt.
That was seen as corrupt.
Strong-arming the Ukraine government.
That's right.
Pressuring them into not doing corrupt behavior and then being accused by Trump and his allies now of corruption in that effort.
But the big unknown is what exactly was that prosecutor doing? Was he on Hunter Biden's trail at that time? Was he actually investigating that? That's what Giuliani is out there to
And it's not Hunter
develop.
Biden he was after. He was after Hunter Biden's boss, a Russian oligarch. Maybe they were going to go after this company, and then Hunter would then be affected because he wouldn't be making money from them anymore. And so that's like the whole plot. It's complicated, but that's what they're going for.
Yeah, complicated, and still a lot of questions about the timeline, what exactly the motivations were, who was looking into whom, and what Giuliani is going to hope to what he hopes to dig up now when he travels in the coming days.
And I think it's important to put out Biden's statement. He says the push, or his campaign is telling us today, the push to oust the former prosecutor Victor Shokin in 2016 was undertaken, quote, without any regard for how it would or would not impact business interests of his son. So that's what they're saying. There's nothing to see here.
This was the vice president doing his job, the official Obama administration policy, try to root out corruption, and a part of the record that he's proud of, that he's spoken since his vice presidency about.
And by the way, Giuliani is also saying that what he's doing is not illegal, although he does admit it could be seen as improper, which is weird.
And I think that we will have to stay on all the twists and turns of this story. There will be more to come. Thank you, Justin.
Yes, thank you.
So also today, overnight at 12:01, just last night, big new tariffs went in place. The U.S. Ramping up tariffs on $200 billion of incoming Chinese goods, pretty dramatically, from 10% to 25%. We have a graphic, I think, that'll show all of this incredibly long list of items impacted, things like seafood and luggage, electronics, just a number of incoming products to the United States. Now, I was struck by the fact that this new rate hike went into effect at 12:01, but it only impacts products that leave China today, not those that are already in transit. So we know the Chinese delegation is still here in the nation's capital negotiating with our own diplomats about a possible trade deal. And now there's this threat essentially making its way across the ocean. And it's the closer that those newly taxed goods get to the United States, the more real that threat of increased tariffs will be. I want to bring in two guests. We have Mary Lovely, a professor at Syracuse University, as well as Michelle Jones, a fourth-generation farmer from Montana. And Michelle, I want to start with you because you've been pretty outspoken saying that you're against the idea of increased tariffs against these incoming Chinese goods. Tell us why.
Yeah, certainly as a farmer, tariffs have never really done the agriculture community any favors. We now have seen retaliatory tariffs on our own products that we're trying to export overseas. In the case of China, particularly in terms of soybeans as well as sorghum, but for our own farm, we have seen them disappear from our wheat market, despite they have a tariff on incoming wheat, and they actually have stopped importing them once we lost the tariff. And there's also increases to our input costs, the cost of steel, the cost of our other goods that is negatively impacting our the agriculture economy.
And Professor Lovely, now to you. Can a deal still be reached with the Chinese delegation that's here? Seems like the president is really upping the ante, putting quite a lot of pressure on them just while they're still in town.
Yes, the president is determined to negotiate with a gun to the head of the Chinese. But I do think a deal will likely be done. And the reason I believe that is because the Chinese delegation is still here. With this threat hanging over their head, they wouldn't be here if they didn't think that a deal could be done. So we hope that a deal is still going to be sealed, hopefully by the end of this weekend. I think Michelle was very articulate in explaining some of the pain that farmers are feeling. farmers as a group have been very patriotic in saying that they're willing to sacrifice for some gains here. But I think that if President Trump goes through and raises these tariffs and then China retaliates, there'll be a lot more pain and no gain. So I really don't see anything in it for the Trump administration either, not to strike a deal here this weekend.
And Professor Lovely, it does seem like the markets are making a similar calculation. You're not seeing a major meltdown in line with what you might expect. I'm curious how that affects the negotiations from your perspective. Does that weaken the president's hand if everyone, maybe including the Chinese, thinks that he's bluffing?
Well, you know, it's a dangerous game to try to guess what is in the mind of Donald Trump. But I would say that the markets have seen this administration make threats and make initiatives that haven't come through, and they are not overreacting. I think that the president is more sophisticated than merely thinking, oh, this is not going to move markets. I think he does know that it's moved markets. And if he doesn't know, there's a lot of people in the business community that are telling him that it will move markets. So I think he knows. And I think he does think that this type of strategy is a winning one. There is enough on the table here to keep the Chinese here. And again, I think we're likely to see a deal by the end of the week. I could be wrong. I hope not, because I think a lot of farmers like Michelle will really suffer if we do not get a deal this weekend.
Michelle, I want to ask you about the line from those that are in favor of some of these tariffs and in favor of the tough tactics. You know, they say that this pressure on China could mean that people turn elsewhere. They turn to other countries for manufactured goods, back to the United States for manufactured goods. Is there any plus side that you see? Could you be convinced of an argument like that?
Well, I think that it's important to make clear that we certainly support fixing some of China's trade distorting practices. I'm involved heavily in the wheat industry, and we are supportive of cases that we have at the WTO that we're winning for their trade distorting policies. But we would have hoped to have seen it done without tariffs that are having a substantial impact on the amount of goods that we can ship to China as well as our imports. And in terms of the commodity market, this week, soybeans and wheat, I believe also corn, are sitting on contract lows. So the news of breakdown in the talks and then continuing to meet, but we also raised tariff, has had a substantial impact on the commodities markets in a negative manner. And so hopefully we can get to a deal soon so that we can start to roll back and scale back some of these tariffs and allow us to normalize trade again.
And Professor Lovely, I'll let you have the last word here. I was struck by the big vote of confidence that the president got from Democrats on Capitol Hill. We have a tweet from Minority Leader Chuck Schumer there in the Senate, who basically said, stay strong when you're talking to China. Don't back down. Is this a rare moment where both sides seem to agree the president is at least moving in the right direction?
Well, Senator Schumer has never been a free trader, but it's also not his district that's suffering right now so badly, his state. I think that the people who think that, well, you know, this stuff will just move someplace else, we'll get it from someplace else, or it will reshore, fail to realize that that is going to be costly. No matter how we look at it, it's going to raise costs for American businesses, and there will be retaliation. So there's really no way around this pain. So again, I think the best thing for the U.S. economy, for U.S. farmers, will be an end to the conflict, and hopefully that the Chinese make a good enough deal where we see significant progress in changing the practices to which we object.
Well, Professor Mary Lovely there from Syracuse, thank you for joining us. And Michelle Jones, all the way from Montana, we really appreciate you being with us here on the briefing room. We're going to turn to 2020 now in the presidential primary race. We have reporters all around the country this weekend. We love them because we have candidates that are all around the country this weekend. By my count, there are 10 candidates in 8 states this weekend alone. Now, I imagine, Rick, that those candidates are going to be asked a lot about this escalating tension in terms of oversight and investigations between the House and the administration. I know you've been writing a lot this week on whether or not Democrats are basically getting backed further and further into an impeachment corner. Is this going to start boiling over in the 2020 race?
Yeah, it actually has an interesting relationship with 2020 years because at times they're moving them along. We saw Elizabeth Warren, among others, come out very strong early on saying we have to be talking about impeachment. And at other times it's being foisted back onto the agenda. My take on this, Mary Alice, is the Democrats had a plan. They felt like, okay, let's investigate, not impeach. Call it impeachment light, whatever it is. They weren't going to go there. And now the president, through the roadblocks that he has erected and all of the various ways that you're seeing stonewalling on the part of the White House, they are realizing they may not have a choice. And as Nancy Pelosi said this week, maybe the president is self-impeaching himself. That's not really how it works.
Well, we have one reporter who's out on the road. I'm sure he will bring some of these questions to Senator Cory Booker. Our Adam Kelsey is there in South Carolina ahead of Cory Booker's trip to the state this weekend. Adam, tell us what you plan to ask Cory Booker about and what his agenda is for this weekend.
Yeah, so Mary Alice, we want to hear a lot more about Cory Booker's recently released gun control plan. That was the big headline earlier this week for the New Jersey senator, rolling out a fairly comprehensive plan that includes some ideas that we've heard before from Democrats, things like universal background checks, but also some novel ideas as well. We're talking about a gun registration program, something that he's compared basically to a driver's license, saying that if you need a license to operate an automobile, you should need a license to carry a firearm as well, or even just to own a firearm. Things as well like gun safety courses. When you want to purchase a firearm, you have to take a safety course, and that way the government can ensure that you can properly handle it. But something that we want to find out is what are the consequences for breaking some of these proposed laws. Cory Booker is somebody who is running for president somewhat on a criminal justice reform platform, and as it relates to drug offenses, nonviolent drug offenses, he said that the United States needs to do a better job of not sending people to prison. Our prisons are overpopulated, and there are a lot of people who could benefit more from rehabilitation rather than jail time. So does that cross over into this gun control plan? Is he assuming that people who break these laws are not going to go to prison for doing so? There's already been a lot of pushback on the Republican side, a lot of questions about how much knowledge the government will have about people's personal possessions, these firearms, of course. Even some pushback yesterday from a fellow Democrat, Beto O'Rourke, who said that he trusts gun owners, and he said there's a lot of them in his native Texas, that he trusts them to operate their guns safely. They might not necessarily need licenses for those weapons.
And intriguing on that point, Beto O'Rourke today saying that he was basically taking back his previous critique. He's now applauding Cory Booker for advancing this as part of the conversation, whether or not it's realistic. I want to ask, though, about these issues of oversight and impeachment. Senator Booker has been, we've seen some pretty famous and infamous moments of him asking tough questions on Capitol Hill. But the broader brand of Cory Booker, a lot of it is based on a need to work together. There's a kind of a higher calling in politics that he likes to try to aspire toward. How is he handling, Adam, the issues around the stonewalling and the calls to impeach President Trump?
Yeah, well, he has not joined with his Senate colleague Elizabeth Warren in those impeachment calls. And like you said, Rick, a lot of Cory Booker's campaign, a lot of his time in the Senate has been about bipartisanship. He really openly talks about loving all Americans, loving all people, being willing to work with his Republican colleagues across the aisle. We saw it when he was working on criminal justice reform last year alongside Republicans, eventually signed by President Trump, something that he applauded the president for doing. But when it comes to impeachment, he has not gone that far. Like I said, he's not joined with Elizabeth Warren, who was on the Senate floor, again, calling for impeachment earlier this week. Like you mentioned, Rick, the tough questions continue to come from Cory Booker. He really went after Attorney General William Barr last week when he appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee, saying that his press conference ahead of the Mueller report was basically a form of propaganda. He has gone so far as to call on William Barr to resign from his position, but so far those calls have not reached the Oval Office and President Trump.
Adam, thank you so much for joining us there from South Carolina. We know you're there ahead of an exclusive interview that ABC News has with Cory Booker that'll be airing this weekend on Sunday. We're excited to see our team out there on the road. And thanks to Dax, who's, I think, shooting your live shot. It's nice to have a team effort all around to make the briefing room happen. Switching gears now, our chief transportation correspondent, David Curley, was flying high today with a team known as the D-Day Squadron, ahead of the 75-year anniversary of D-Day, sort of the beginning of the end of World War II. This team will fly restored vintage aircraft all the way to Normandy, but first they flew around the nation's capital. I talked to David Curley just a little bit ago about his pretty awesome day. Take a listen.
Well, this was a remarkable day and just the beginning of this group's efforts to remember D-Day. You're looking at a C-47, which was basically the troop carrier used in World War II. The plane that 13,000 paratroopers jumped out of on D-Day behind enemy lines in Normandy. So here in Frederick, Maryland, it is now raining, which is why I'm standing underneath the wing of an aircraft. I want to show you some of the pictures of getting on board one of these C-47s, actually taking off and in formation, flying south of Washington, D.C., then coming up the Potomac, going past the Capitol, past the Washington Monument, right over the Pentagon and Arlington National Cemetery, a nod to those who sacrificed in World War II. Coming up is the 75th anniversary of D-Day, and this group, it's called the D-Day Squadron, have a group of these C-47s that they are going to fly up the coast of the United States, then hop over to England, and will fly these on the anniversary of D-Day over to Normandy. There will actually be some paratroopers who are going to jump out of the aircraft as well. Now, if this rain slows down just a little bit, Mary Alice, we'll show you the aircraft, but we're going to wait for it to calm a little bit. Go ahead and ask your question.
So tell me more about the pilots you met today. Who's going to be flying all the way over to Normandy to be part of this celebration?
So these are pilots who are interested in vintage aircraft. And one of the leaders of the D-Day Squadron, actually, his father fought in World War II. He's a commercial pilot. He has his own business. But he started flying these old aircraft, and he's kind of helping lead this group. He's been involved for about a dozen years. And it's all kind of volunteers who love these aircraft. All right, we're going to get wet to show you. I just want to show you inside this aircraft.
Commitment to the story right there.
Stay under the wing of this one. We're going to stay under this wing for a little bit.
But I imagine a cockpit is so much different.
Oh, everything is different. So here we come to a C-47 that is kind of in the shape of the aircraft that would have been there for the paratroopers. Can we come aboard real quick? Thanks very much. I'm going to show you, yes, no air conditioning, none of that kind of stuff.
Just filming a little bit.
All right. But give you a sense of what it was like for these guys inside. So here's what the paratroopers would hold on to, this guide wire. They'd come down and be lined up, come down, and then they'd get the go, and then they would jump out of this aircraft behind enemy lines. So this gives you a sense of what this is like and what it was like for those paratroopers 75 years ago. But it was an amazing ride, and to look down and see Arlington National Cemetery and the Washington Monument was quite remarkable for us. But this gives you a sense of what it actually was like for those paratroopers. It's only about 8, 9 feet, 10 feet wide, and this would be filled. If you look down here on the left, you can kind of see the what they'd be harnessed in, the seat belts that would hold them, just a line. This actually, if I can come up here for a second, Nate, you know, this basically is a fold-up seat. So you'd have paratroopers in each one of these all the way up, getting ready to make their jumps.
And I thank you to David Curley for bringing us that story. You know, my grandfather was there on the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, and as you can imagine, he could talk about that day with detail, pretty excruciating detail, until the day he died. It was pretty special. But we want to finish out this week on Nurses Appreciation Week. We want to thank nurses everywhere, often unsung heroes around the country. And our ABC News reporter, Erica King, was at a local DC hospital talking to nurses. What did you learn today?
So, you know, a lot of people spend time thanking their doctors and praising their doctors for all the hard work that they do, but we can't forget about our nurses. After all, it is Nurse Appreciation Week, and ABC News reporter Matt Seiler and I actually caught up with some nurses at Sibley Memorial Hospital today in Washington, D.C., and all of them just like really, all of them really, you know, expressing how rewarding this occupation is for them.
Yeah,
So
you can imagine
take a
helping people
listen.
every day.
Yeah.
Let's watch.
I've been a nurse since 1991, so that'd be 28 years. It's actually been an honor and a privilege to actually grow in this profession.
What does it mean for you to be a nurse?
Making a difference, to be honest with you. It's quite rewarding when you see a patient who comes in sick and then they leave feeling a lot better. And knowing that you're a part of that recovery, it's a big thing.
I think this profession is not just nursing, but a calling.
Have you had any patients that have, came back to thank you?
He basically said that I had saved him from surgery, that all my care and my commitment really saved him from that. So maybe like a month later, he actually came back with a card and saying, this nurse saved me from surgery. That meant a lot.
And my personal thanks to those actual nurses at Sibley. Both of my boys were born there. They were
Amazing.
terrific. We had a great experience there, and they are pretty amazing people.
Yeah, well, thank
So
you,
genuine.
Erica.
Absolutely.
And thank you to nurses everywhere, all across the country, in schools, with local governments, in hospitals, obviously. And thank you also to mothers ahead of Mother's Day this weekend. Happy Friday, everyone. I'm Mary Alice Parks, Erica King, Rick Klein. This is The Briefing Room. We'll be back on Monday at 3:30. You can watch us every day on your ABC News app. Thanks again.